But yeah, so, anyway, the Bronze Age had... Unhinged?
Unhigged.
I'm gonna cry on camera right now.
Let's just steal every pretty person that we can find and shove them into a building so they have to serve the Sultan.
The best way to do that is to be an aluminum can.
I'm ready to fight some Dutch on ice.
Bonk yourself. Good boy. You can't just say things that aren't true and expect me to support them. I would argue 300 is more period accurate in terms of the armor.
You see how bright and colorful that is? That is how armor actually would look.
For those who don't remember LimeWire,
I'd say I'd probably have to go with land snacks.
that's so late. That's
No, okay, fine. They're not land snacks.
So, Thornbury, you're a gentleman who enjoys a good history, but may not be considered a historian yourself, correct?
Correct. That's why I exist here.
So, have you heard of a group called the Sea Peoples?
No.
I've heard of seamen.
Okay, it's been literally 15 seconds.
Just as long as we need.
Some would say too long.
Every time I try. I don't know why. Yeah, so a bunch of seamen came ashore and collapsed the entire Middle Eastern framework. It's the Near East.
Hey guys, welcome back to History Unhinged.
Yeah, I hate you. I hate you. Where's the bonking stick? Where's my bonk? You both get a bonk.
Why am I getting bonked?
I don't know, because you encouraged it. Anyway.
That's what the show's for.
That's a fair point. Well, okay. I just wanted to talk about the Sea Peoples.
Sea Peoples, I'm ready.
It's a mystery. It's a mystery of
Give me the seamen.
I'm gonna cry. I'm gonna cry on camera right now. Bonk yourself. Good boy.
That is not what you want to say in the aftermath of that.
Welcome to the Patreon segment.
This is not even the
That's
Patreon
gonna
segment.
end up. That's gonna end up in the intro montage. Is what that's gonna do.
Yeah.
Bonk yourself. Good boy. Slap, slap, slap. Okay. Well.
Wait. All three of us should bonk ourselves.
I hit myself in the nose.
It's okay, now you can't smell the seamen.
All right, so the seamen in question, the cool thing is we don't know where they came from. They just kind of appear.
Or where they came from, you say.
You know what? One of you guys do the intro. Let's see how you do this.
All right. Hey guys, welcome back to History Unhinged. Today we're going to talk about the Bronze Age.
Ball torture. That's how I feel right now.
Believe it or not, that was a accurate and relevant description of a lot of torture devices used throughout the Bronze Age. Please elaborate.
You can't just say things that aren't true and expect me to support them.
Either that or you're going to deny
stick
them.
People inside of a bowl covered in honey and like date fruit and then like heat the bowl up.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
They did. It was a whole method of torture that specifically was utilized in order to slowly roast someone to death.
Yeah.
They also would do the thing where they would slather people in honey and basically bury them in a way
Yeah.
that they would get eaten alive by insects.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you
It's
thought
called-
the Spanish Inquisition was bad?
Here's the thing.
It's called scaphism.
Why would they do these things?
To make an example.
Yeah.
For who?
Well, think about it this way. How many people speed? No, actually, let's use a better one. When all three of us were younger, you are aware of LimeWire?
Yes.
All right, so a lot of people use LimeWire, right? It was just, for those who don't remember LimeWire, it was a website that would allow you to download music for free. I mean, you often paid for it by installing 8 million Trojan horses and viruses on your computer in the process, but the idea was that you were downloading your favorite Green Day song for free, and that was great, because otherwise you had to pay money for it, and who wants to do that? Well, the federal government, recognizing they couldn't possibly catch every single person who downloaded something off of LimeWire, because that was piracy, instead of doing, a reasonable fine, like, you stole a song that's worth $3, so you're going to pay a fine of 10, don't do it again. Instead, they would fine people thousands of dollars if they got caught downloading songs off of LimeWire. And the goal was to say, hey, yeah, you probably won't get caught, but if you do, is it worth the risk? And to an extent, it almost worked, but what really worked was people got sick of viruses, and then Apple made iTunes happen. And that was pretty cheap, so you don't need LimeWire anymore. And also, no viruses. Good deal, realistically. Once again, capitalism solving problems.
Yeah. Now imagine that, except instead of that, you don't steal a date so they don't rip you apart by covering you in date honey and then having you be eaten alive by insects.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, it's like really just parallels. Like that makes sense.
Yes.
It's the
One
same
is
thing.
one is for entertainment, one is for survival. That makes
Yeah.
sense.
And then the Romans actually made it even better by combining the survival and the entertainment.
Yeah. A lot of people actually get confused when they talk about stuff for gladiators because they think of people fighting to the death. You didn't want actual professional gladiators fighting to the death because that was expensive to train them.
Yeah.
It really was. It's like what would happen. Imagine if you were training a racehorse every single time for a new race and then that racehorse had to be put down every single time because, oh no, they broke an ankle. So now you got to put it down and train a whole new racehorse for the next race. You don't do that.
There's a lot of irony in the Romans considering other people barbaric. The Greeks, on the other hand, they were like, you know what? We don't need violence in our entertainment. What we do need
Is naked wrestling.
is naked wrestling, which often was actually done to the death in the Olympics because it was more dishonorable to surrender than it was to die.
I don't know if it was more, it wasn't like it was more common in the sense that it was like the majority of what happened.
That's not what I'm not saying it happened
but
all
like
the
some
time, but,
people
like,
took it to extreme
Yeah.
degrees.
because it wasn't expensive. It was just you. Like you were just a dude lathered up in olive oil wrestling another dude. Which the Turks have continued doing to this day, which is weird because they didn't come up with it. They adopted that.
They like something about it.
Yeah, I have a comment on Instagram with like 10,000 likes it's on a video of people doing Turkish wrestling, and I said there is no disclaimer long enough. That was a popular one. But yeah, so anyway, the Bronze Age has unhinged?
Unhigged.
Unhigged? No, that's unhinged.
Every episode now, there's
A different letter.
A different letter is going.
I have put that specific N back up like 4 times now.
Oh, well, the D fell off yesterday.
I know.
we lost the D.
I put the D back up.
Yeah, much like the eunuchs we discussed.
Yes, entirely.
But yeah, so you had your torture methods. They were mostly execution methods, though. They weren't really big on torture so much, because it was really hard to torture someone without killing them up until pretty recently.
Yeah.
So infections and cuts and whatnot. You were more likely to kill somebody than get information out of them. So the idea was kill them in a less painful way. They were still going to die, but at least it wasn't going to be roasted alive inside of a bronze bowl.
In their case, what they often would do is try to make it just as publicly horrifying as possible. Yeah. So yeah, being eaten alive by insects over a period of 3 days where you slowly starve to death while also, actually your flesh decomposes and gets eaten by ants.
Yeah. Spoiler alert, the movie came out in like 1995, so it's your fault if you haven't seen it yet, but at the end of Braveheart, how he gets got.
Yeah.
That was kind of the idea, was you don't rebel, don't plot, don't do any of that. Otherwise, you're going to die like that guy did.
Yeah.
Which was not an enjoyable experience.
The big one was burying people alive and stuff was a common thing that was done as like a major punishment.
Yeah, I don't think it was Bronze Age, but later on they had a process in, I think, Europe where you would stuff somebody into a burlap sack with a snake, a chicken, and I think a dog or a cat and throw them into the river. Which honestly was pretty cruel to the animals.
Yeah, that seems significantly more cruel to the animals. I know that like in the Ottoman times, they would actually just stuff people into sacks and throw them into the water.
Yeah.
Like that was the thing that was done. Reportedly, the
That's actually just efficient.
Yeah, that sounds a lot less
That's a very
complicated.
cheap. That's a very cheap way of doing it, and it's horrifying.
In fact, I'm trying to remember the guy's name specifically. I've done a couple of videos on him. One of the sultans it was Ibrahim. Ibrahim the Mad is what his epithet became. He killed basically his entire harem by tying them up in sacks and then throwing them into the river. Or not river, but into the bay.
Okay, we discussed this kind of over the past 2 days, but we talked about the harems that they had in China and the harems that they had in Ottoman Turkey.
Yes.
Were the Ottoman harems full of attractive women?
Yes.
Okay, so the Ottoman harems were attractive. The Chinese harems were more about political power.
Correct. The Chinese ones were there specifically because of their familial connections. The Ottomans wanted the exact opposite. They wanted no familial connections. So instead, what it is that they ended up doing is they went, oh, hey, yeah, let's just steal every pretty person that we can find and shove them into a building so they have to serve the Sultan. Which is why
you know what? I think the Ottomans might have been onto something more so than the Chinese.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like if I'm gonna have a harem, I would prefer it be the Ottoman harem.
I wonder why.
Yeah, the result of what actually came after, though, for the actual system was significantly more brutal.
Oh yeah, we talked about that. Though.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine. But yeah. So anyway, back to the concept we were talking about. It's the sea peoples, correct?
Yeah, my transition was gonna be, speaking of people being thrown into the sea, did any of them ever come out of it?
Yes, some of them did. The problem is that we have absolutely no idea where they came from. Well, yeah, because you get these, they're mostly Egyptian. You have some Mycenaean, some Hittite. Well, actually, really no Hittite, because we didn't really know they were a thing. The Bible said they were a thing, but then we didn't have any evidence of them until like the 1880s or something like that. It was late.
With major archaeology, because a lot of the previous stuff has been completely wiped or leveled or built over.
Yeah, and for a while, they just thought it was some minor cultural group in the North Levant, and then they found these artifacts stretching across Anatolia, and they're like, oh, the Hittites were a real thing. That's pretty cool. We're still kind of arguing over whether the biblical Hittites and the archaeological Hittites are the same thing. Given that the Bible mostly was compiled traditionally between 1200 BC and 200 BC, the Hittites in the Bible probably are more the remnants of the Hittites than they are the Hittite Empire, which did kind of collapse during the Bronze Age collapse. But that whole collapse wasn't caused by the Sea People. It was kind of another situation like with World War I or the fall of Rome. But the Bronze Age collapse was interesting because, yes, it was a migration that kind of like kicked off the ultimate fall. But every time these people are described, they just came from the sea. There's no oh, they were Greeks. No,
Described as basically Mediterranean Vikings, and then with them comes destruction and not much else.
And it's worse because like it's not like the Mycenaeans didn't know about the Egyptians and vice versa. They did. They both just agreed those aren't those people.
So to clarify for those who aren't familiar with the Bronze Age and the Bronze Age collapse, what time period is this? Who are the civilizations involved, and how does the collapse happen?
I'm drawing a blank on it here right now. If I recall correctly, the end of the Bronze Age. It's like what, you have 1200 BC to like 800 BC?
The Bronze Age collapse is basically the 12th century BC.
Yeah.
And then after that, it's just a dark age. But here's the thing is like a ton of the stuff that you get in the book of Exodus, for example, if you look at the Iliad and the Odyssey, these are all Bronze Age stories, which is why I'm going to strangle Christopher Nolan with my bare hands.
Oh my God, every time that anything is depicted, specifically where it's Bronze Age and it's the most muted, bland possible. All right, you all here, you see the armor, you see like the different things that are around here. See that? Right over there?
That's a historically accurate suit of Anglo-Norman armor.
You see how bright and colorful that is? That is how armor actually would look. That's like the major thing.
Yeah.
The thing that pisses me off is every single time that it shows something that is in the medieval world or anything prior, and it looks so bland and brown and gray.
Yep.
And like, especially Bronze Age. Holy shit. If anyone out here, and I don't know, you're going to put a bunch of photos up in here, and I highly recommend you do this. Look up Bronze Age armor.
It's so funny.
It's so funny.
It's so silly looking.
It looks like a Halloween costume, but way heavier.
Yeah, you've seen the picture of Matt Damon as Odysseus, I think, for the new movie, and he's wearing armor that basically looks like it's out of the 300 movie, but if you actually kept I would argue 300 is more period accurate in terms of the armor than the Odyssey is looking like it's going to be.
Do you mean what armor?
They had the Corinthian helmets, and they were wearing greaves. All they were really missing was the tunic and the cuirass.
Yeah.
I mean, other than that, it's not. I mean, they probably would have worn capes.
So in the Bronze Age, the armies were way smaller, like way smaller than what you would typically anticipate. Because if you were in the army, you had think of it almost like medieval times, where you would have knights that were like elite warriors and soldiers, and then you'd have a levy that would be going with them.
And this wasn't. We're not talking about hoplites yet.
No,
these are not the ancient Greek soldiers that you think of that have all that leather armor, sometimes bronze, a huge shield, their spear, their sword, their helmet. That's not what these people were. They were not citizen soldiers yet. They were literally a militia.
Look, this is Mycenaean armor. It's just an example.
It's just a bunch of cylinders.
It's just plates. It's like what would happen. Imagine if the Michelin Man was a Greek warrior.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I'm not even kidding.
It's one of those things where you're like, you know what? That is certainly pragmatic. That is function over form to its core. Mm-hmm. They were like, I need to make sure nobody cuts me open, the best way to do that is to be an aluminum can.
Literally.
It is
Better example.
They were fighting Coca-Colas.
Massive shields, huge suits of solid bronze armor. There were overlapping layers of different levels of bronze. And then the helmets, oh my God, the helmets were so freaking colorful. They were covered in feathers, in horns, in all, like, you know the image that you have of like the stereotypical Viking, which is not real, of like horned helmets?
It's a lot closer.
They actually had fucking horned helmets.
This is at the period of history where they hadn't yet figured out that that was a really bad idea.
Because it was more about showing off who you were and your status and anything else than it was function.
I mean, look, one of these guys had to be peacocking hard enough for the most beautiful woman in the world to want him.
So you look at a Bronze Age army and you would...
Helen of Troy.
Like Helen of Troy.
Yeah, that's right. The world's oldest war story, arguably, starts because of a woman.
My wife
She
is
didn't
not
even
even paying
notice.
attention in here. No, she is wrapped up within her own world.
Women causing conflict since the dawn of time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Pay no mind to the men fighting an entire 10-year-long war over one woman, which is...
It was the woman's fault, clearly.
oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
Men had no choice.
Bro podcast, guys. Bro podcast.
Listen, all I'm saying is that, like, if...
The men may have done the fighting, but who was the cause of the fighting?
Like, Matt, who would you identify as being, like, one of the most attractive women of our age?
My wife.
Yeah, that was the right answer,
Smart
but not
answer,
the
yeah.
right answer for the podcast. Who is Madison Beer?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe like
I swear to God, they're just throwing darts at a board and pumping out a new
Right now,
pop
I have to
song
look this up here in the first place.
every year. Like, who are these people?
I don't know. I'll say Kate Beckinsale because I can't think of anybody in the last like 10 years. Kate Beckinsale? Really?
I know the name. I have no image of what she looks like.
Hang on.
I'm not gonna lie, I'm just looking at this person, and the only thing that I see is like stereotypical Victoria's Secret model.
Yeah.
Like, she is beautiful. Yes, she
here's
is
the
beautiful.
problem. I asked
but
you
I
guys
don't.
'cause I couldn't
I
think of
see
anyone
nothing
myself.
unique about this person that would identify.
I see where you're coming from. That's fair.
All right.
Okay. Let's. You know what? Let's go back to like when we were kids. Let's say when we were teenagers. Kate Upton, right? We all agreed Kate Upton was, for some reason, the best you could get.
No, Raven from Teen Titans.
I hate you. That's an animated.
Yeah, I was going to
person.
say Alexander.
Yeah, but you're saying going back to kids.
All right,
What were we
okay.
thinking of as kids?
This is the worst. The biggest problem is that collectively we can't think of a single relevant pop culture woman to kidnap and send to Troy.
Dua Lipa, but like she doesn't fit.
What?
What?
Dua Lipa?
But what do you mean she doesn't fit?
I don't know. I don't know. I just figured for you guys that
I don't know.
wasn't gonna be a good
Zendaya's
poll.
popular right now.
Sure.
Let's say that the Turks kidnapped Zendaya.
Okay.
And this would be like every single person in America going to fight the Turks because of that.
Considering the plot of Dune, that's not shocking.
Oh my God. Listen, I have heard enough about Paul Dune.
It's Dune time.
My favorite part was when Paul Dune duned all over the place and said it's Dune time.
Oh my God.
We did try to watch Dune, the 1986 Dune.
It's
Bad. It's like watching Spaceballs, but Spaceballs might have better special effects.
I mean, it was also meant to be a comedy describing it versus an actual serious production.
But keep in mind, this is 10 years after the first Star Wars came out.
Oh, dear God.
Yeah, it was bad. It was not a good time. Although, Kyle MacLachlan, is that who it is?
I think so.
Fantastic.
The guy who plays the captain on How I Met Your Mother.
Yeah, the fact that he's basically playing the same character is amazing to me.
Yeah, that's kind of shocking.
That guy deserves a spot in the Hall of Fame. But yeah, point is, it's like somebody in Turkey kidnapped Zendaya, and we all went to. Actually, more realistically, it's like somebody in Canada kidnapped Zendaya, and we all went to fight because one guy wanted to sleep with Zendaya, and it was Obama.
Okay, but here's the thing. Would we have known that that's the reason?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah. No, it was publicly because I mean the whole point behind the thing with the audio, like, it was a very public insult. Like, he was a very public insult. And so yes, that was the reason.
So we were all like, "This dude sucks. Let's go."
It was like it would be like if Trudeau kidnapped Zendaya and Donald Trump took us to war over it.
Is there anybody that if Canada kidnapped today, that would actually happen?
To be fair, the
Danny
amount of people
DeVito.
that would wish to fight.
If Canada took Danny DeVito, I would slaughter every single Canadian until he was returned.
What about you? Anybody?
My wife.
Canada cannot have Danny DeVito. He must stay. Especially because if he gets lost, the RCMP is never finding him.
Lost.
We could do a show on the RCMP not finding people, and it would be 4 hours long.
You have talked about it
Yeah,
extensively for how
it's
bad
crazy.
they are.
But yeah, I mean, the thing with that's the Bronze Age, man. Just every single story we get out of it is so old and so poorly recorded that it comes across almost as being comedy.
Who were the civilizations then?
Well, you got the Mycenaean Greeks,
Yep.
who are basically just like slightly more tribalist Greeks.
Yes.
There is actually a pretty linear progression between Mycenaean Greece and Hellenistic Greece. Just there's a period where they go from being like up here to down here and then back to up here in terms of wealth.
And we have varying records of different kings and other stuff, but it's different than what we would have with city-states.
Yeah.
It's like, imagine instead of city-states, a lot of little empires, basically.
Because at that time, you could only really administrate so much territory. So that's one of the things about the Iliad that suggests its authenticity to some extent, is that it's not Agamemnon leads Greece to war. It's Agamemnon leads a whole alliance of random Mycenaean kings into battle against the Trojans because
And their own
they're
little
Greeks who are
alliance of
over
other
there.
force.
Those Greeks over there are not real Greeks. We're real Greeks. At the time, they would have been Phrygians, I believe, or potentially Hittites, though. Phrygians might be a little later.
No, and even then, it wouldn't have been Hittites for the Trojans because they had to, like, there was far too many cultural similarities. Maybe there was some blend that would have existed, but it specifically was something that was an offshoot or cousin of the Greek culture.
They saw them basically as not being full Greeks, yet being Greeks nonetheless.
Which would have then been the difference between the Anatolian Greeks that would have been seen and the, like, island Greek. What would you even call it
Anatolian
at that
Greeks
point?
have really never had it well. The history of the Anatolian Greeks is like getting conquered by other Greeks, getting conquered by not Greeks at all, getting conquered by not Greeks at all from further east of the not Greeks, and then getting conquered by the Greeks again, and then getting conquered by Greeks who are northern Greeks.
Yeah. And then
the
rebelling and
Romans.
then getting slaughtered by the people that you just stood up against.
Yeah. It's kind of like how there was never a good time to be alive in Russia. It's kind of the same. It's not as bad with Greece, though. Actually, we kind of overplay how bad it was under the Persians. The Persians were administering that territory pretty fairly.
Oh no, it's like one of those things when you end up seeing stuff for like 300, and it's the lines that obviously as a kid watching it, it's like, oh, this is really cool. But then when you hear the lines of like, oh, we won't be slaves, and it's like the Spartans telling the Persians that it's like they won't be slaves or they won't like they're fighting against becoming slaves. Like motherfucker, your culture, your if you want to look at the population of your settlements, it is about 70% slaves. Like the actual number of Spartans is very, very small. They are an elite small citizen group where it's a pyramid of the Spartans, the citizens, under them the Perioikoi, which the Perioikoi are
Wait. What do you think the name Perioikoi would mean, based just how it sounds?
It sounds vaguely religious or entertainment based.
Interesting. It basically just meant free landed men who weren't citizens.
Got it.
So it was like allied peoples, basically.
Yep. So that would be anyone that lived within their territory that was not a slave, where they were the craftsmen. They were the people that would be like making the spears. They would be they would be doing literally every job except being a soldier.
Yeah.
And then under them, half the population
The Helots.
were the helots, the slaves. And that was the overwhelming majority. And
Just to be clear here, because throughout history, what we see a lot is that the justification for slaves is they're other people. We went across this sea and took some people and brought them back. That is not what the Spartans did. The Spartans basically went to everybody around Sparta and said, all right, those of you who are willing to not be citizens and perform skilled labor, you guys can be this group. Everybody else, you're slaves. So the closest people around to them in culture and ethnicity were the people they took as slaves. It was like taking your third cousin and making him your slave.
yep.
There was absolutely no like you know, we are brothers in, you know, history. And they were like, no, you guys, you know, too bad, should have fought harder.
Yep.
Now you're slaves forever. It wasn't like, you know, you were a slave, but your kids would be free. No, your slaves had slaves who had slaves.
Correct. And then from that,
It was one of the closest things to American chattel slavery.
It genuinely was, but actually it was worse in many cases because, well,
That's a hot take.
well,
That's going to be...
no, because we're not talking about American chattel slavery. If you wanted to compare it to anything, it's closer to Haitian.
Oh, God.
It's closer to Haitian chattel slavery, specifically because they would go on acts of terror preemptively in order to put down rebellions. See, what would happen there in the American South is that if someone went and rebelled or did something, like slaves were treated brutally. In Haiti, there would be punitive measures that would be launched preemptively in order to be able to put down a possibility of rebellion.
No matter how much you hate the French, you don't hate the French enough.
And so the Spartans would do that by organizing regular campaigns of terror against their own slaves in order to suppress them and keep them from being able to gather strength to rebel against them.
What would be an example of some of the things that they would do on these terror campaigns?
As a act of just a simple thing for graduation, in order to be able to be recognized as a full Spartan warrior having killed someone, they would stalk and murder a slave.
So that was just
Like,
commonplace for each soldier?
Imagine a teenage boy that in order to become a man...
That's the other thing is we're talking about like 14 and 15-year-olds.
Yeah. A teenage boy, in order to become a man, you had to murder someone. And so you would stalk and kill a slave.
Because they couldn't have you stalk and kill another Spartan because that would be, you would lose one. You don't want that. And then you couldn't stalk and kill the Periakoi because then the Periakoi might revolt. And they actually ended up later in history, they ended up fighting with the Spartans because they had to. But
Yes. Once warfare
not
became
against,
significantly
like,
larger.
with them. That was mostly against like the Athenians.
The Athenians. It was the Peloponnesian Wars because they had to actually levy greater forces versus their small, concentrated elite force because numbers actually matter. Go figure.
You want to know how bad the Athenians were during the 5th century? Everybody allied with the Spartans to fight them. Yeah. So Corinth, which was basically the one place on the Peloponnesian Peninsula that managed to not get enslaved by the Spartans because the Corinthians actually were wealthy and powerful and had a port and like a really nice port too because it was that little, you know how you have how Greece looks, how you have like the mainland up here, then that little sliver where Athens is, and then Peloponnesia. That little sliver of water that comes in, that inland sea, that is where Corinth was. So they had a great natural harbor, they had a lot of good trade, and most of those helmets you see in in entertainment about Greece is the Corinthian helmet. So these guys were powerful enough to remain independent from the Spartans. And the Athenians were right there. So the Spartans would usually have to fight both if they wanted to fight one. In the 400s, the Athenians, after beating the Persians, with everybody else's help, by the way, the Athenians are like, oh, well, what if we go put some colonies out there?
Yes.
And then what if we colonize more? And then what if we just take other people's colonies? And what if the entire eastern seaboard of Greece and all of the islands and part of Macedonia and part of Thrace, what if that was all Athens too? And everybody else went, wait a minute, didn't we just fight the Persians to prevent this from happening? And Sparta kind of led the charge. And everybody else followed behind Sparta because your choice was Athens, who is now so powerful that they can crush you if they want to, or Sparta, who do absolutely horrible things to their own people, but at least they don't really have any interest in conquering you.
Which is true. I mean, their thing was relatively small. They had no ability to extend too much beyond their borders. Way too long for consolidation.
Yeah. And they never had a big enough Spartan population to take an army of several thousand Spartans out of Sparta and send them to an Athens in order to maintain order.
They can't garrison a territory because if they send too many of their forces away, the Helots would revolt at home.
Yeah. You basically would have had to send the Helots with the army, and then you have two separate populations, and given how the Spartans were, they'd probably end up fighting each other.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's a reason why, despite being, for a time, the Spartans do get overblown to a large extent. There was a time period in Greek history where they were the cream of the crop. There was no point where your phalanx was going to be the Spartan phalanx.
Well, because that's true. Pound for pound, the Spartans were the best. However, numbers actually matter, and tactics actually matter.
Yeah.
And one of the things, this is the part that I
They
always find
refused
hilarious.
to adapt.
Not only do they refuse to adapt, but you know what the king of the crop was, or the best thing you could have for a medieval army was, right? Like what was the pinnacle soldier or force for medieval times?
Oh, this is going to be a controversial question.
I mean, the instinct would
For the
be
majority of people, not just one location or area, but the majority. What was the cream of the crop?
The
Armored knight.
oh.
The armored knight.
Armored
The
knight.
armored knight, the cavalryman. That was the idea. And throughout history, cavalry, though obviously some cultures would prioritize heavy infantry or archers or others, cavalry were still seen as elites. To the Spartans, cavalry were pussies.
Yep.
They f***ing hated them.
If you were on a horse, you were a bitch.
You were a bitch. They hated it, to the point that for centuries, the Spartans had no cavalry whatsoever. The Greeks, in general, did not utilize much cavalry, but some forces did. The Thessalians, they were famous for their high-quality horses and for use of cavalry. The other different Greek states would oftentimes use cavalry as a harassing force, where they were javelin men, where they would, ride into battle, toss some javelins, and then get the hell out of there.
That was actually the most common method of cavalry for a long time.
for a lot of the Greeks. Yeah, and that's how they operated. The
You didn't have
Spartans...
stirrups.
No,
The stirrup was invented after the birth of Christ, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah, and it was in something that came out of the steppe, like
Yeah.
it was Crimea, basically around that region that the stirrup comes into
Scythians.
existence. Yeah. So the Spartans viewed anyone that was on a horse as a little bitch, but they came to recognize eventually, after dealing with cavalry so much as it became more and more prominent, that hey guys, shit, we actually need a cavalry force. So what do? They start developing cavalry. Guess who becomes their cavalry? The old Spartans that are incapable or too infirm to be able to fight in the infantry. So they get like the old rich guys who are fat and lazy and can't really do much anymore, or who are sick or ill, and they become the elite cavalry, which is only used as basically a screening force to be able to kind of deal with the enemy cavalry while the infantry still does the real job.
But what's fascinating about all of that is, despite the fact that by the mid 4th century, Sparta is on its way out as being recognized as a superpower in Greece. Their armies have been diluted by Perikoi. There aren't that many Spartans left. The Athenians really took it out of them during the Peloponnesian Wars. Philip of Macedon gets down there, and whether it was that the Spartans were still that good, those of them that were left, or if it was that the mythos was that strong, Philip gets to Sparta, and the Spartans refuse to surrender and tell him that he'll have to kill them all, basically. And he's like, you know what? Are you willing to swear allegiance in exchange for autonomy? And they're like, yeah, we'll settle for that. So Philip, the father of Alexander the Great, after just marching his way through Greece, basically unopposed, even though he kept being opposed, because, he was like, hey, all of these people like to fight with spears. What if we use longer spears so that they can't even get to us? And also, what if we use cavalry, because they still haven't figured that one out?
Oh my god, yeah.
So he brings the best cavalry in the world and extra long spears, and then gets all the way through Greece, gets to Sparta, and goes, you know what? I'm good. I'm good to not fight you. Let's just make a deal. And then,
To be fair, he
gets
was constantly
assassinated.
having to deal with rebellions and
Yeah.
different things. So a chance to not have to fight someone was obviously welcome.
Yeah, he was also probably pretty sure that if he conquered Sparta and then left anybody alive, they would rebel.
Yeah.
And the funny part is that Rome's just over to the west, not doing anything yet.
Nope. It is quite literally a city-state that has not done hardly any conquering for the surrounding area at all.
Yeah,
For what purpose? Did they just not have a viable army at that time?
No,
they were a small city-state.
Yeah. They were quite literally a small city-state that at the time was subservient to the Etruscans.
And we're still not entirely sure where they came from either. Because traditionally, they're like, oh, they cite the Iliad, basically. They're like, yeah, we're the remaining Trojans. The problem is, there's no archaeological evidence of that.
Well, see, that is the thing that they ended up using at different points. So what I find hilarious about Rome is that they had a bit of an identity crisis for a large amount of their history because they could never really decide on where exactly they came from, because depending upon what they pushed, it offended someone. Similar to the modern day and age, how people get offended by everything. In
They
their
were
case,
also super offended by Greeks and yet doing everything they could to imitate the Greeks.
that's why. But it was specific classes of people because they had a bit of a love-hate relationship with Greece of like, hey, we highly respect this advanced culture with all these different things that we are definitely a part of that same heritage. But also, the Greeks are decadent and weak people, and our martial prowess is so much better. We are not Greeks. We are better than Greeks.
They repeatedly got beat the fuck out by Greeks.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
It was a thing they had to deal with a lot in their early history before it is that, really, after the Pyrrhic Wars, it just, they were able to conquer Greece relatively easily.
Yeah.
But they did consistently have to deal with Greeks because
They still lost to Pyrrhus.
well, they lost
But it was,
wittingly.
yeah, exactly. It was a strategic victory. It was a tactical loss.
Yes.
They lost all the battles, but Pyrrhus lost so many men that to this day, if you try and play the video game Rome 2 Total War and you play the Divide It Impera mod, the hardest part about playing as Pyrrhus, as Epirus, is the fact that it's right after the Pyrrhic Wars, and you have nobody. You have no people. Your entire population has been slaughtered at war with Rome, even though you kept beating the Romans.
It's the same problem that ended up happening with Hannibal.
The Romans just somehow kept having more people.
Yep. Drafting consensus is the way they operated because instead of just the citizen volunteer soldier, they would actually draft people, and they kept on producing enough people that they could just keep on building it up.
Also, despite the fact that they held themselves as being very much above the local Italic peoples, they were one of them. So they could, if they just conquered the tribe next door, those people pretty easily integrated. So they kept losing battles to Pyrrhus of Epirus, but then they kept getting more and more of these Samnites and I think the Lugians. No, the Lugians were up north. The Samnites and the people, the Oscatans, like all these different little tribes kept getting absorbed into Rome as it grew. So Pyrrhus keeps trying to draw people from the same little city-state on the coast of Greece and losing more and more people as the Romans are just like, well, now this is also Rome.
They would rapidly grow during that time until they had control basically over the Italian peninsula.
It's crazy. In around the year 400 BC, the Gauls sack Rome. They destroy it. By the year 200 BC, the Romans are conquering Macedonia. They have not only conquered all of Italy and parts of Sicily, I think the entirety of Sicily by that point, they are also conquering Macedonia.
Yep.
200 years.
And this goes back to the exact thing that I was talking about here before, the whole consul system and military glory. The Romans were quite literally the definition of high risk, high reward, which I say in a lot of games when I do really stupid shit, but high risk, high reward.
Me and Bannerlord with an army of 200 Britannian Fians going after like the entire Imperial army.
Correct. The amount of glory and loot and everything that you could get out of that, massive. You're going and doing it by yourself. Could I get my entire force wiped? Yes, you could. And the Romans did that time and time again because their consuls had to get glory within that 1 year. So they were just going.
Let's talk about the Battle of Cannae, shall we?
Oh my God, no.
We're not. We've gotten too much into Rome.
We're doing too much.
It's so
Rome.
easy to talk about Rome.
Well, wait. So that you talking about Bannerlords makes me have a question. Considering we are talking a lot about battles, what would be your ideal medieval army?
Ooh, this is Steven, you and I have to pick one each.
What is it going up against?
That's the thing, is against each other.
There's okay, yeah, but
Who gets to pick first?
You. Oh yeah.
shit? All right.
Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. I get it. All right, okay. I am starting off. I'm taking Welsh longbowmen.
Welsh long. Okay, so you're going with archers essentially as a base for this year.
I am starting with Welsh longbowmen. Yes.
Okay, then by that logic, specifically what I would be going with is we're going to need to pair that against... Fuck, you see, here's the problem. You go with light cavalry, which light cavalry is the big thing that you're going to need to utilize against archers. The Welsh longbowmen especially were famous for being able to ward off cavalry through their use of stakes, and also it's going to depend upon the terrain. So it's a very strong and effective thing. The big thing that ended up actually killing the longbowmen in that sense is that their losses were not able to be replaced because it took years in order to be able to be trained to that, which is why musketmen were able to replace that.
Oh yeah, everybody, like the English loved to make fun of the Welsh, but at the same time, the Seithwir were elite. They were the elite forces of Wales, were their longbowmen.
The only way that I could combat and go against it here, Korean archers.
You can't bring in the Koreans.
Yes, like, hey, you set up for anything here, and you're talking for the medieval time because here's the actual issue. And a lot of people don't even realize this. The longest record they had for range for what someone was able to hit came specifically out of like Korean bowmen.
Okay, but what
who were able to hit
how
at
powerful
distance?
were the bows?
So the thing is, on terms of distance and power, for when it's not a matter of just the draw weight that specifically comes. The way that they were combined, because remember we're talking about like horn bows and other things that are utilized. Yes, it's not going to function as well in a wet environment, but from actual power, they could outshoot by about half again the distance of a longbow.
All right,
so a draw weight of 140 pounds on a longbow in comparison to a 90-pound horn bow, the horn bow is going to be significantly better. The problem with the horn bow is that it was more restricted based off its environment.
Gotcha.
Which is one of the reasons why
if
the
we're in
Mongols
Europe,
ran
it's going to be too wet.
It depends on where it is. Like, as an example, horn bow in England, it is not going to function at all. Everything is way too damp. Same reason why the Mongols had so much difficulty once they actually tried to go south of China down into Vietnam. Half their shit didn't function because it would just literally fall apart because of the weather.
How did those, what was the puncture on those? Could those pierce plate?
Here's the thing. Longbows by themselves were not capable of piercing plate.
I know.
But they could get through.
I'm just going, I have to counter what you just picked.
They could get through chainmail.
Okay, I'm picking Frankish knights.
wait, hang on, really quickly. So let's establish the location. So it'll be you have your initial picks, location, time, and then you get secondary sources of like backup. Essentially, you get your backup ranks as a choice. You are meeting.
That's not how it works, though.
Well, you're bringing your armies to the location.
Here's the thing. Even if we started over, what would almost have to happen is that you would need like a list, kind of like what people do with D&D scenarios of like, we're going to roll a dice. This chooses the location. This chooses the time period. This chooses the weather. And then just you'd have to create a battlefield from that scenario. And then from that, you would have to base it off and actually
go perfect conditions on a grassy field. Make it easy.
Well, I was going to say, like,
because that's what typical medieval warfare was.
Completely flat terrain, everything.
They would seek a battle plane that had generally the least obstacles possible, which was the opposite of what they did during classical warfare. Because the medieval warfare was basically like, it was more polite.
Let's specifically say
you're oftentimes going to agree to meet at a location.
Yeah.
Let's specifically say an open field at the foothills of the Swiss Alps in morning.
Okay. I'm still taking the longbowman.
Yeah, I understand that.
I'm still taking my Welsh longbowman to start.
Yep.
Are you still taking your Koreans?
Considering it's the perfect conditions, yes.
Okay, then I'm backing that with Frankish knights.
Yeah, which is going to have to be something that compares. To which case I would counter with a Scottish Schiltron.
All right.
For those who are not familiar, explain what that is.
So the Scots were one of the early developers of essentially pike warfare in order to be able to combat against knights specifically. That was the whole point. So think of it like a hedgehog, where instead of the pike formations that you would see of the ancient classical period, where they would be, all in a massive block, pike out, holding it, the Scots would form into big circle blocks in order to be able to ward off cavalry that would try and hit them from the flanks. So in this case, it would be a formation where it would be pikemen that are surrounding archers that are firing out, which on one hand is going to ward off the knights. It's going to make it a larger target to be able to hit by your archers in that scenario, but simultaneously my archers are going to outrange yours. So they will do more damage initially, but they will be easier targets afterwards.
Yeah. I feel like we're picking a main archer group, a main infantry group, and a main cavalry group here.
If I have to then counter with a specific choice for knights,
No. I'm saying if you want to take the Schiltron to counter the cavalry, go for it. But that means you have cavalry left and I have infantry left.
Yes, true. Okay, then in that case, I'd say we probably would need to go choice for like cavalry, infantry, etc. So if I'm going to then go with cavalry, it's going to need to be a mixed lighter force. I'm going to have to probably go with I think I'm going to have to go with boyars.
Ooh, we're bringing in the Slavs.
I think we would go with the boyars. The boyars were essentially the Russo-Ukrainian, the whole thing for their knights for equivalent. They were a mixed force. If you want to describe them as medium cavalry, that's probably the best bet. They wouldn't be super light cavalry like what you would see with the Arab cultures, where they would have, the horsebowmen or a horsebowman who, for the life of him, was not going to pierce chainmail no matter what he did. Yeah. So in this case here, their medium cavalry would be kind of able to do both. They would have bows. They would be able to fight on horseback here, but they were heavy enough that they had staying power to actually fight.
Basically, charge for charge, knights are going to take them out, but they're going to be able to outrun knights if they want to.
Correct.
For the most part, during like the 12th and 13th century.
But they're not going to be the best at anything they do. Again, they're by that logic a jack of all trade elite.
Yeah. All right, fair.
Now it's infantry at this point.
I'm taking Swiss pikes.
So now you're going with Swiss pikes for them.
Because those boyars can't get close enough to my knights or my pikes without my archers shredding them.
Correct. This is true. That is
Why Swiss pikes in particular?
They were really good at it.
Oh, they were fucking.
And they also were heavily armored.
Well, okay. Well, here's the thing. You also say Swiss pikemen. The Swiss pikemen were not pikemen. They were the halberdiers.
Yeah, they were more
They would actually fight because their range was significantly shorter. A lot of people think of the Swiss pikemen of what you would see later on. The Swiss were specifically famous for their halberd units, and their pikemen were able to be beaten out by Landsknechts and others in the development of the terco formations because pikes started to get way longer going into the late 1500s,
absurdly long.
Like
you
absurdly
need an entire tree.
Pretty much.
Whoa.
We're talking pikes that were 16 to 21 feet long. To the point that
Now, keep in mind, the sarissa was how long?
about this kind of same length.
Okay,
So
yeah.
a sarissa would range from 14 to 20 something feet. And that's how they would operate.
Yeah.
And the way that you hold that pike, you don't hold it like this.
Every once in a while, Europe just comes back to
You
pikes.
could. It would. So the pikemen would hold it essentially like this, outward. And so what would happen as you're trying to hold and direct it, some of the pikes would even be balanced on the shoulders of the people who were in front of them. And then you would use this as a lunge. And one of the things that they would do in order to say, as an example, ward off cavalry, is that you would kneel on the ground. You'd have your pike wrapped up in your leg, similar to what you'd be doing to when you're trying to string a bow using only your leg. And then a pikeman would pull out their sword and they would hold it like this. So that as what would happen is cavalry, it's to ward them off if they come close or they get hit. Infantry or the cavalryman falls off his horse, sword is drawn, stab as they go.
Yeah.
Very effective. The big weakness that the pikes had was that they were not maneuverable. Obviously, that was the thing. Halberds.
Also, not very good against muskets.
No, God, no.
Not a good counter to muskets. Although for a while they would use formations where you would have the pikemen out in front of the musketeers. The musketeers would fire as the pikemen kneeled, and then if the cavalry got too close, the pikemen would fight.
So are you going with
problem
later
was
pikes
if
or are
you're-
you going with halberds? Because there's a difference for what the Swiss were famous for and what they did.
We're saying
Because if you're going with that logic, and I know I'm sticking with this, by that it would be the Spanish tercos, if anything.
yeah, but we're at the Alps.
Yeah. So
My guys aren't tired. They just walked from their house.
again, that is something you obviously can go with.
What time period are we doing? I figured we were talking like 14th, 15th century.
Yeah, then that would be a time where the halberd would be starting to come into play more around the late 1300s.
Yeah, I'm sticking with my Swiss.
Okay. So if they're doing that, again, halberd, exactly what I was talking about with the boyars, though. It's almost a kind of jack of all trades. It could ward off cavalry. It could go against infantry. It could go against armor.
Use it as an axe.
Its biggest weakness is that halberds, people think that they were a lot bigger than they actually were. No, a halberd was only like 4.5, 5 feet tall. That's it. So a person standing up, the halberd was about as tall as them.
I just don't need to worry about him charging me.
Yeah. So it's able to ward off cavalry, but it's not like you can't plant it and then use it because someone with a lance is going to be able to hit you way before you are able to hit them. That's the thing. So
I have stakes.
yeah.
The English like to put stakes out in front of the longbowmen.
Yeah. Which is something they're going to use. If we are going with that as an infantry counter, the only thing that I can really think of by that logic, I'd say I'd probably have to go with Landsknechts.
That's so late. That's cheating.
No, okay, fine. They're not Landsknechts. It would be the condottiere.
Okay, fine. That works.
It would be the condottiere.
Very, very similar Italian force.
And they were mixed and earlier. Think of essentially they would be the mercenaries that they did kind of everything. There would be swordsmen that would be mixed in there. There would be pikemen. There would be halberdiers. It would be a mixed force of what they would utilize.
This was fun. It makes me want to see what you guys would do in the Napoleonic era.
Well, the thing is, we could actually take everything we just said and using video games, we could do that.
Yeah. No, I think you should.
We should. That would be a fun.
That would be a fun little thing here.
What would
That would be something we could do for the channel overall. Is just like have people give us a time period. We go grab a total war, and then construct our armies in it and go face to face.
Yeah.
So I have another proposition for you. Napoleonic era, you specifically have 1,000 men.
Oh God.
You have 1,000 men. You can distribute them.
Can I still use Welsh longbow?
as ever you want. It's in the south of France, along the Mediterranean. So there's the opportunity for naval combat here as well.
100 of my men are Austrian Jaegers.
Explain.
The Austrians had an elite force that specifically used air rifles.
Yeah,
now,
they were silent.
Very, like, this is the thing that a lot of people don't realize when they look at guns. This is a really fucking cool thing here. So you know Lewis and Clark, right? They went on their whole adventure.
They had one.
They had one. And it's not a musket. It is an air rifle. So it was capable of firing a musket round with about the same strength as a musket ball, but it utilized compressed air and could rapidly be reloaded to fire. If a musket, a trained man was able to hopefully fire 3 rounds over the course of a minute. Oftentimes in battle, it was typically 2. An air rifle could fire 7 to 9.
But they would get less powerful over time.
They would get less powerful with time. So you could fire your full 7, but by the time you got to your, say, 10th or 12th or 15th shot, it reached a point where it was too weak to be able to penetrate through light wood. It would still get into your body and embed itself, but it would not do nearly the same damage that it would in the first dozen shots.
But at the same time, you can get off a dozen shots at somebody who's using a musket. You're going to win that fight.
And the problem with them here, while they were fucking amazing, stupidly expensive.
Yeah.
Holy shit, stupidly expensive. And this is one of the key reasons why they were only
I think
used.
Thomas Jefferson gave them one.
Yes. It was used by only small elite groups of like a couple dozen men, basically, because 50 rifles of those air rifles, you could equip 1,000 musket men, basically. So if we're not limited on funds for it, I mean, I'll take a core of that, but there's a key reason why they were used as elites that were sent into very specific positions on the battlefield in order to be able to take out forces. And because of how long range and accurate they were, because these were rifles, not muskets, they were rifled barrels. They were quiet and they could be used to take out enemy officers.
What was the range?
It's not super long.
If they were
Nothing
still
like a modern rifle.
No, not like a modern rifle.
But like 50 yards, 100 yards.
So if 50 yards was essentially an effective range for a musket, you could say this was 100 to 150.
Yeah.
It was over double the range.
Also, the thing with muskets, just to be clear, is that it wasn't going to penetrate somebody at 50 yards. It was that it was going to be so inaccurate after 50 yards that you might as well not shoot it. Which is why they have the don't fire until you can see the whites of their eyes.
Yeah.
Which, if you ever try to actually use that tactic in a video game, oh my God, that must have been horrifying. Because it's like you get to the front of a line, it's just people fall.
In the 1800s, air rifles like the Girardoni, known for their large calibers and repeating capabilities, had an effective lethal range of 150 yards. So compare that to like the 40 to 50 yards of a musket.
Wow.
And even today, that's usually like in terms of accuracy, like somebody like human error, that's usually the effective range of a rifle for most people.
Also, as said, it's like the more you shoot it, the lower that range becomes.
Yeah.
Like by the time you get to your 12th shot, you're probably at more like a 60-yard effective range.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've recruited how many of those men?
You just take like a small core, you get probably 100 of them.
Every time I try and have a topic for this show, we end up so far from it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So and yeah,
We're supposed to talk about the sea people.
I
We were
won't.
talking about military, we talked about Bronze Age, we did
We're
go
getting
and
there,
do
we're getting
this.
there.
It's a staging point for militaries.
There's also not going to be a limit on price. So yeah, you could definitely do 100 of those people. What would be your counter then?
I'm just going to take 1,000 of those people.
Incredible. All right, well, I'm bringing 3 American frigates.
Like what?
So you guys.
I'm just taking a whole bunch of air rifle dudes.
You guys shoot at each other on the beach. I'll be a mile out, just
Cool.
killing you.
How
with
are you going to
cannons.
land?
I don't have to.
Oh no, no,
You do
see,
if you wanna win.
no, I got the perfect counter. We're
I'm
gonna
blowing you to
freeze
bits
the
with mortars
ocean.
and cannons.
We're
I'm
gonna
just going to
no.
hanging out off the coast.
We're gonna freeze the ocean, and then we're gonna walk our cavalry to your boats. Fuck you.
How are you going to freeze the ocean?
We're just gonna ask the French.
Okay.
Yeah.
They're just going to take the Alps and move them somewhere else.
Exactly.
The fact
problem
that
solved.
happened, though, like, someone
To be clear, when he says that happened, he doesn't mean that the French took the Alps and moved them somewhere else.
No, I mean that the French in their wars against the Dutch at one point managed to take out the entire Dutch navy with cavalry.
How?
Because
Harbor froze.
the harbor froze.
Oh,
it
right,
was
right.
such a cold winter that year that there was essentially a flash freeze, and the Dutch ships out in the harbor got locked by ice, which in turn allowed the French, what they did to get over there as fast as possible is they doubled up or tripled up their men to where the cavalry would have 1 or 2 infantrymen also, so it was like 2 to 3 men to a horse, just like riding up as fast as they could, dismounting, and then the infantry marching the last like 100 yards or so to the ships in order to be able to take them out.
Wow.
Because this is mind you, this is long after the Dutch had used ice skates in order to be able to take out the Spanish.
Yeah.
Oh, we got to hear more about that.
Same exact.
How long has this one been going?
10 more minutes and then we head to Patreon.
Ooh, I think we saved the Dutch ice skating warriors for Patreon.
Okay, fair enough.
That's a Patreon segment right there. Because I did want to, since we got back to boats, I see this as an opportunity.
That was part of the reason I brought in the frigates.
Yeah, so because I want you all to picture. Ready? It's the year 1177 BC.
Okay.
So let's pick that one. You are an Egyptian. You're just hanging out, on the coast.
So I'm drunk. Got it.
Yes, you're just hanging out on the coast. You've been struck. There's been some famines. There's been some wars. A few plagues now and then. In fact, a pretty funky series of ones like 30 years earlier that some Jewish guy brought.
Weird stuff too.
Yeah, just some dudes like talking about, let my people go, and then frogs. Point is, you see some strange ships approaching. And these people, as they get closer, they don't look right. They don't sound right. They don't even smell right. And you're not sure where that ship came from. These people proceed to cause the downfall of like 5 different civilizations in your immediate vicinity. And then they leave. To this day, they left behind no solid archaeological record. They left behind no linguistic record, very little in the way of genetic records, which suggests there was not much rape and pillage going on, just a lot of pillage. And on top of that, nobody seems sure where they started. The Greeks talk about them, but there's a lot south of the Greeks there's a lot south of the Greeks that's west of everybody else. The Hittites talk about them, but they came from the south for the Hittites. They came from the west for the Greeks. They came from the north for the Egyptians, and they came from the west for the Levantine peoples. None of these groups are able to identify these people. They don't know who they are. And the way they're described doesn't match with Cretians, doesn't match with anybody in the Aegean, doesn't match with anybody in the Adriatic, it doesn't even match with anybody from Italy. Recently, there have been some suggestions based on the way they are described that they might have been Nuragic.
Off the top of my head, I don't know what that is.
Corsica and Sardinia.
Which was where?
West of Italy.
Like the 2 little islands that are basically just west of Italy here, where it's below France. There's 2 little spots right there. The place where Napoleon ended up being sent to after for Corsica.
The terms the Egyptians use to describe them are pretty similar to the terms that people had at the time for the islands.
Where Napoleon came from.
Yeah, where Napoleon came from. Well, he was also exiled back to Corsica.
Yeah.
So, these people, and you're like, okay, cool, great. Now we might have an idea where they came from. The problem is, why? Why did they do this? There's no record of climate change. There's no record of them being invaded. There's no reason to think they were suffering from some kind of famine. So all we can really see is, okay, a group of people probably from Corsica, Sardinia, and Sicily came east and raided a whole bunch of different people. There is no sign that any of that inspired any sort of cultural revolution, any sort of leap in technology, any of that back in Corsica, Sardinia, and Sicily. As far as we know, a horde of people from a few islands in the Mediterranean randomly one day decided they were going to sail east, screw everybody else's civilization up, and then leave.
The only thing that I can think of that would actually cause that, if there isn't an environmental factor, like the Vikings make sense because it reached a point of population where like, shit, we don't have the agricultural lands to support our population to the degree that we needed. We have to go explore and get other stuff.
Yeah.
In their case, it could very easily be something as simple as a successful warlord. Because, you get a guy who gets an idea into his head of like, hey, I want to take other people's shit. I needed people in order to be able to do that. Unites a bunch of people, takes them out to sea, does it. He dies. Oh, go figure. 40 years later, now that's not really happening anymore.
And this happens like before Carthage is a thing, before Rome's a thing. This happens before Greece is really a thing. It's Mycenaean Greece. The one thing we have that may indicate where some of these people came from happens to be the Philistines. Because the Philistines don't make sense. The way the Philistines are described paints them as Mycenaean Greeks. And they're in Israel. And by the way, the Bible, they're just there. There's no, and one day the Philistines landed. Or there's no, oh, and there was this great war that left a bunch of Greek people here.
They were just already there.
They're just there. So the problem becomes, if they're Mycenaean Greeks, why did the Mycenaean Greeks not know that? And why did the Mycenaean Greeks talk about the sea peoples? Did the Mycenaeans go with them?
I don't know the amount of conflicts, but even then, there's another thing, though, that was specifically said, and this is what I've always maintained personally. Like, I got a theory specifically about the Bronze Age collapse.
Got a theory.
All right? So people like to attribute things to one thing or the other. Some people say it's because of climate change. Some people say it's because of the sea people. Some people say it's because a variety of different reasons. Disease, who knows? My personal theory is that all these things occurred, but simultaneously happened with a collapse in trade that specifically would end the Bronze Age. You know how bronze is made?
Yeah.
Well, it's copper and tin, isn't it?
A lot of the copper came from Greece.
Yeah. And the big thing, tin, the tin is the rarest material in that. We think of tin as like a tin can. It's cheap. Like, who gives a shit about tin?
Most of our tin is aluminum.
But yeah, and tin itself is actually extremely rare. Like, very rare. It for such a useless material, arguably, I mean, it's obviously very versatile. It's not a valuable metal in the sense of like a precious one, but it is rare to the point that in the Mediterranean, there was only like 3 or 4 spots that the majority of tin came from.
There's also a growing belief that a lot of the tin used in Copper Age Europe, like Western Europe, came from the British Isles. Because they had a lot of tin.
They had a lot of tin. That was a really valuable thing. It's like Britain overall was a massive drain for the Romans. They lost more money than they actually gained out of it. However, they still needed the metal from it in order to be able to do things.
It's one of the few justifications for them remaining in Britain.
Yeah, for as long as they did, because otherwise it was useless. The big thing is that the loss of even one of those mines, whether by being destroyed or, more importantly, it going dry, like the vein running out, that in and of itself would collapse trade routes all across the Mediterranean. It would stop new tools from being developed. It would stop weapons from being developed. It would stop every single thing was dependent upon bronze.
Part of the reason they developed iron smelting was because iron was more plentiful than tin.
Yes.
I will say I am surprised. I know it has a higher melting point, but I'm surprised that an alloy preceded iron.
Because it's so easy to work with. And that's the thing, because it wasn't just bronze preceded it, copper preceded bronze.
Yeah.
Because they would use copper, but the problem with copper is that it was too malleable.
They added tin to copper to make copper stronger. They added carbon to iron to make our iron stronger.
Yeah,
Yes.
inevitably steel, yeah.
Yeah.
But it just to me, in terms of like the complexity of making bronze, like from a chemical and an elemental standpoint.
Well, at some point you got to actually figure out that you can melt iron down and turn it into a tool.
Yeah.
Also, iron was typically forged rather than cast, while you would cast copper.
Which is why it was way more versatile. Iron weapons ended up being way better because they could be made bigger. Yeah. Like that's the thing. Where's the sword?
It's over
Grab
there.
that sword.
That's a real sword.
Yeah.
Like, that's a 2.5 foot.
Yeah. No bronze weapon would ever be this size. That just was not going to happen. A bronze blade was going to be half this length.
Wow.
That's the whole point. Yeah. Bronze swords were basically oversized daggers. And the entire reason for that is because when you are casting it, it can't be more than a certain size or else it doesn't cool evenly. And if it doesn't cool evenly, it will break when you use it. So this is something that's fairly limited. Have you ever wondered why, if you look at, say, as an example, the Egyptian khopesh, you know how it's curved like a scythe for their scythe swords? Mm-hmm. The whole reason they did that to create axe blades and why those were more common was because it concentrated more of the strength of the blade into one spot for when you swung. Mm-hmm. Because the reverse was, you make the blade bigger so it has more weight. So when you swing it, you can do more with it. Mm-hmm. But since they couldn't do that, you curve it, and it allows it to concentrate more of the force of a smaller blade into one area. That's why they had curved blades.
Yeah, there was a lot more slashing in Bronze Age warfare, whereas there's a lot more stabbing in Iron Age.
Yes. So once you were able to make things longer, and they simultaneously had more plentiful material, I mean, there was the big thing. When I was talking about Bronze Age armies being super small. Imagine a couple hundred dudes that come from this rare material that, yes, it's really good to be able to use, but you can equip an army of a couple hundred guys. Mm-hmm. Now you go to the Iron Age, which is way more plentiful, and it's like, hey, you have a Bronze Age force. Yeah, but we can produce 4 times the number of weapons in the same amount of time, and our army is now a couple thousand dudes.
Yeah, and iron was just more durable, too.
Yes.
That helped. Yeah, like you would not want to go toe-to-toe bronze sword to iron sword, even if they are the same size. Not going to go well for the bronze.
No, yeah, iron's going to cut right through it.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's not cut right through it, but it'll definitely nick the blade.
It'll nick it a lot more easily. It's a more that's the funny thing. It's like bronze is harder than iron. That's the thing. It's harder. So a lot of people confuse hardness with strength. The hardness means it can be sharper. Yes, but the harder a blade is, the more likely it is to be able to chip. So that's like the whole thing with the katanas, is that a lot of people talk about, yes, how hard and sharp the blades were. Yeah, they could be very fucking sharp. But the most elite ones of the katanas had like a soft, malleable spine that allowed it to flex a little bit. Was not as flexible as European blades, so they would chip a lot more easily. But that was the best quality of them. A solid bronze blade that had its edge hardened would just nick and chip going up against anything that resisted it. It's also one of the reasons why you would never want to use bronze against like heavy armor, because it's just going to break against it.
Iron will dent, bronze will chip.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nice.
That was a long rant for it. I think that we're basically done with this here. We actually got back to Bronze Age.
We did.
Yeah, we did. Well done, fellas.
Yeah, thank you.
Next comes the Patreon segment.
Where you can hear about Dutch on ice skates.
Dutch on ice skates.
Dutch on ice. I want to see that Red Dead Redemption 2 musical, Dutch on Ice.
Dutch on Ice.
Maybe, we got to have an Old West episode at some point.
Maybe we'll write it in the Patreon.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Dutch on Ice.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah, guys, thank you for watching. If you want to learn about people from the Netherlands on ice skates causing violence, you're going to do it on Patreon. Why are you still here? The show's over.
Get out.
Are they gone?
Yes. I don't fucking know here. At this point, I'm just awkwardly staring at them the entire time.
Yep.
Are they still watching?
I don't know. I gotta pee, so.
Well, I want to watch that, brother. Let's go.